define us. So, you know, being really, it's like as Christians, we're not being permitted to be fully human. Why was I shamed because I got ill? Illness is part of the human experience. That's part of the suffering. That's part of the, you know, condition in this world. We're going to get ill. We're going to get old. We're going to die. And a lot of people seem very uncomfortable to touch that, to touch those human experiences. And again, it's because capitalism, you know, you have to look like this, you have to have this house. It's all filtered into the church. And that's very sad, you know. I actually have, I don't follow, as far as Latino leaders, I actually follow a man from Costa Rica. His name is Harold Segura, and he's an evangelical, but he's actually, no, he's a Protestant. He's a Protestant Baptist, but he's studying with Catholics. He's a very interfaith, very ecumenical minded pastor, and he's a writer. He's an influential, but he's wise. He's a very, he's also a leader, but he's not a capitalist. He's got a very, he's written several books. He wrote a book on child theology. He has a new book out that's called The Revolution of Tenderness, where he's talking about empathy being the next revolution that we need in the world, the revolution of empathy. And it starts with being empathetic with children. And isn't that interesting? You know, it is some kind of model about success and all that. It's basically talking about being empathetic to children. It's how we're going to really revolutionize the world. He's an innovator. He also wrote a book about just the economic model that he feels from all his study in theology. He's been a theology professor. He's his doctorates in theology right now. But you know, he wrote a book on what is a fair economic vision, and he took it from the Bible. So he's a thinker that I'm tuning into. I'm not tuning into Spanish leaders in America because they all want me to have a big house. They all want me to be, you know, have no gray hair. They all want me to, you know, so I'm following the vision of the Latin American leaders, and they're cycling out liberation theology. They understand liberation theology. It went wrong in my country, okay? And liberation theology was not meant to be revolution, like the image people get is Ernesto Cardenal, the priest, that he was actually out, you know, he felt it's okay to have a gun and shoot people, you know. So liberation theology had its extremists, but I think Gustavo Gutierrez's work was not as extremist as that. He wasn't a radical take up guns and fight. That's not the message there. But for some reason in Nicaragua, because there was an active revolution, they applied it that way. You know, a lot of times theology will be applied in the context where people are. People will read and project their own politics into the theology, you know, which has happened here in America with capitalism. You know, people have projected the gospel as having a house and guaranteeing you long, prosperous life, no illness. And, you know, that's not promised. That's not promised to any of us. I hope and I pray, but it isn't a guarantee, you know.
So when someone that comes from that mindset ends up in the hospital, do you see that they are disappointed in themselves or in God, that all these promises that they've been pumped up with are not flushing out the way that they expected them? Is that why you see that people might not be interested in talking to a chaplain, or they might have a faith crisis because they end up getting a horrible illness or have a tragic accident and it wasn't in the cards for them based on what they were hearing from their preacher?
You know, my experience, David, honestly, is when I encounter like Hispanic patients that have had that, they're very humbled. I find that Hispanics they're not very entitled. Like they're like what I've experienced. I have never seen a Hispanic like shake their fist at heaven and like, why you have me here? Like I almost would say I've not encountered a patient that has ever shaken their fist. Like I feel there's almost a a reverence and a fear. Like, I honestly can tell you, and I serve in a public hospital with very poor people. They don't have anything. They're I mean, I see homeless people, people that are basically off the street in the hospital. So they're very humble, have a very humble attitude. I've never encountered anybody shaking their fist at God. I've also noticed that in my approach, the chaplain I really believe that the patient is, like, when I had a disease, when I was ill, to me, the illness was a teacher. And I hear that consistently from a lot of my patients, that they feel that the illness was given as a teacher. I've almost heard them say, Dios me mandó, esta condición para hacerme pensar, like God sent me this condition so I could reflect. I've heard that way more than any shake of the fist. But again, maybe my context, they're just happy to have a bed. So I don't run into a lot of very prosperous Hispanic. I don't see that many of them in my hospital. It's really people who are not doing very well.
Not to get too personal,
or
but
they don't have a yeah.
I've had a couple of friends who were very excited, and they felt very empowered to do outreach ministry and to have this evangelical mindset when it came down to helping people. So not only being involved helping the poor, the underprivileged, but that it was a double mission. It was a mission to raise them up, to give them dignity and love on them, and to share the message of Jesus and the gospel. And then a few years pass, and I hear that they are no longer interested in that anymore. That now it's only about providing the needs and helping the person in their emotional and psychological well-being, and that this evangelistic component has dropped off because of some type of disappointment, because of some type of feeling burned out or left out in the cold by these evangelical groups. Can you tell me where that comes from? What is it's hard to find religious groups that are deep, that have all the elements. And I know people will talk about the Catholic health workers and groups like that, but I see issues with every group. Either they're too socially minded and not enough spiritually minded, or the other way around. But what is it about the evangelical perspective that makes people completely drop it or feel disenfranchised? Because I know we're talking about the prosperity thing, but there's something else. Do you think that there's too much emphasis on like we're talking about the mental and verbal assent to theological doctrines, and that maybe that's what creates the problem? Or is it the pressure that you can't help someone unless you give them the spiel,
the salvation,
and
you gotta save them, they gotta get saved? And there's also the judgment. There's also doctrinal things. They have to believe this, they have to believe that, and that's just way too much baggage. That makes it hard to reach out to people, because how can you love people? How can you be truly practicing love when it's conditional? You're selling people you're basically you're slapping a doctrine on with the bread. It doesn't work that way. When you freely give from your heart, and if you plant a seed, if they choose it, fine. But I think these groups are it's just very legalistic, very judgmental, and people burn out. People, I belong to those groups too. I have journeyed through quite a lot of these groups, and finally I'm kind of before it was very shaming to say you're a cafeteria Christian. Now I'm like proudly a cafeteria Christian. I have to have a spirituality of my own. And it doesn't mean that I don't respect traditions, or I have them, but I think, like you, I've just been burned and disappointed. And, I find that I can connect to God through the Catholic tradition, but not because I'm not a follower of doctrines and dogmas. For me, it's the Eucharist. I have to kind of put a blind, and right now I find myself, my spirituality is I go to the museums a lot. I go to nature a lot. I go to the Catholic Mass and do a ritual. The Rothko Chapel is my church as much as the Catholic Mass. And I'll do Mass at 3 churches. So I have my own little, way, my own little program that works for me. And sometimes I have a healing art circle at where we're not meeting because of COVID, but I had a healing art circle, and that's where I was meeting God many Sundays. And I would go to the Methodist church, where we had an amazing teacher, and he's a far amazing, he's a Jungian psychologist, but also a teacher, a Sunday school teacher. And I was listening to him, and then I would go and walk across to the Museum of Art and then do my healing circle. That was my Sunday, all these practices. Art is a huge spirituality for me. I meet God through art. I'm not as through now being a Christian 30 years, I'm not as dogmatic anymore and doctrinal, but a lot of people still are, and they like it. They feel safe in those doctrines. It gives them structure and safety. I live a clean life, according to my belief, but some people really, they have a sense of shame and guilt that they still have very much locked in, and they want to continue getting sanctified. And I'm like going backwards. I'm trying to be more human. Human in the sense of more in touch with the fact that I get ill, that I will die, that I'll get old, those things, and integrating that with how I meet God in these thresholds of life. I'm getting more human in that way. But Christians, a lot of these groups, they want to grow holier. And it's frustrating to try to grow holier because we meet ourselves and it's like, whoops, and we have to heal. A lot of these groups don't do healing very well. It's always the blood of Jesus, blood of Jesus. And these people have wounds of trauma from their countries, wounds from their childhood, from Mexico. I'm not saying this my country is a violent country. Mexico has a lot of violence. There's just been a lot of trauma, and I can say that, like in our experience, my mom, bless her, but Mama won't touch her own trauma from our war in Nicaragua. It's all in the past. Jesus washed it away, the blood of Jesus. And I've always come to her and say, Mom, you might need to spend some time in healing with a counselor like I did. But she doesn't, that's just like, no, the blood of Jesus, the past. But things surface. Things come to the surface, and people want to doctrine themselves into holiness. But really, meeting God is a healing. It's internally in here, in the heart, and healing the wounds. And that's how we meet God, more than following this rule or that rule. But I think it's just a stage of, it's like a remember in chaplaincy, your supervisor, at least I remember mine, that we were shown the stages in family theory, when we had that section of family theory, how families are shaped, and we have all the stages of development. I think there's a stage of development spiritually where people have to have the structure of doctrines and dogmas, and then you kind of see that you don't need it. You're more safer in the love of God, and you stay in the love of God. You don't need all these doctrines. But I think it's a doctrinal issue that burns people out. People don't know how to live in the mystic way, and the mystic way is for everybody. It's not just me. People don't know how to live in the book of John. The book of John is so mystical, so beautiful, about living in this spirituality of heart and love and empathy. And and people want to live on in doctrines. I don't know what it is about humans that I don't want that. You know, I want to have communion with the heart and really be centered in my heart and practice and living my Christianity from that place, not from, you know, all these rules and you can't do that, you can't go to this party anymore, you have to tell them that Jesus is going to save them. And you know, I don't mean to, you know, it's just not something that I feel is important. You know, I think what's really interesting is that Harold Segura, this pastor I was telling you about, he actually does a conference on that. He actually is doing outreach to the evangelical world. And I heard this conference, and that's when I became a follower, like, oh my God, this guy's saying what I felt. He's like, hello, everybody. He considers himself evangelical in his approach, even though he's Baptist, but he said something that I went, whoa. But he said to a conference to pastors, he goes, guess what? Newsflash, we're not going to win the world for Jesus. We're not. So stop it. The world isn't going to be won to the Lord. We have to now, our approach is that we have to be engaging with the world. And we're going to engage with the world by knowing social science, by understanding the world better through the language that the world speaks. We have to understand leadership as the world understands it. So he's not saying for people to be worldly, but he's telling pastors to be of the world, to be sophisticated and understand psychology and social science and anthropology. And it's like, wow, there you go. Not just, we got to win everybody. He's like, newsflash, do you see your country? We're not everybody serving Jesus in Peru, not everybody serving Jesus in Costa Rica. And guess what? It's not going to happen. And he just boldly says it. And I'm like, wow, that's true. Why have the evangelical world been so afraid to accept that? The world doesn't have to all be won over for Christ. And there's a sense of guilt and shame about that. Why? You know, we have to learn to speak wisely to our generation, but we don't have to win them. You know, so I like that because it's like a lot like the Jewish approach. Jewish people are not evangelizing; they're not proselytizing. You want to be a Jewish, then come talk to us. But we don't have to win you. You know what I mean? And it's nice and refreshing if the church could do that. It's like, let it go. We have this burden on you that you've got to win everybody. No, you don't. I know, does that sound kind of strange, huh?
It's refreshing because for me, it would be like, before you go out and tell everybody to join the club, why don't you fix the problems within the club and try to make it more healthy and thriving, and then you can start bringing in new members.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it. And he said it. I mean, I have never heard something so freeing, a preaching so freeing. I was like, oh my God, he just put his finger on the biggest sense of shame that pastors have. Win people. It's like, no, you don't. And you notice, and he went on through like recent history from 30 years back in Latin America, where Latin America has managed to place evangelical leaders like in positions of power, like presidential candidates have been evangelical. And he's like, and guess what? Colombia had an evangelical. He goes on and he goes through the whole countries in Latin America, and he goes, and guess what? And the judge so-and-so was evangelical. And guess what? That country's still lost, or that country's still how it was. So stop it. You know, he was like, stop trying to win the world, you know, be okay. Figure out how to converse. And he has a Bible. He's part of a Biblia, virtual Biblia, and they're centered in Argentina. They have some fascinating minds. I'm telling you, I'm not looking at anything theological in this country. My interest right now is, as I get my teacher certification, to teach the living, loving, dying and letting go for the Institute of Birth, Breath, and Death. I want to go teach over there because they're needing this kind of teaching. because hospices, chaplaincy, that's not very, that's not a field that's understood very well in Latin America. So I was listening to a podcast the other day about a woman, a hospice chaplain in Argentina, and she was saying that there's a need. There's a huge need for this field in those countries. So here in Houston, I'm not seeing a whole lot of us Latino chaplains, you know, but I'm seeing that there could be an increase in places like Costa Rica, Venezuela. But I will go do like the workshops in hospitals there, and maybe teach nurses and volunteers. And my hope would be to network with some of these pastors, evangelical, which I hope to network with Pastor Harold, and present the idea of death. I think he would be very open. He would be very open. You know, as a Baptist pastor, he does podcasts like this with priests, with Catholic priests, and he's invited by Catholic archdioceses in different countries to speak. So I mean, he's breaking down fences, and that's kind of how I am too. I want to be a person that's not in my own little fence, you know. Like I said, I'm in a Methodist church, and then I'll go to the museum, and then, you know, I'm kind of, you know, I branch out of my own house.
Before we end our conversation, can you tell us a little bit about what does hospice mean to most Latin Americans? We were in a call, and we had a Latina, you know how in hospice they have the people that promote the hospital, marketer, and she's like, you need to change the term hospice, because hospice, and the people that she was dealing with, she was in California, meant an orphanage. Have you ever heard people say that a hospice or hospicio means kind of like a place where you leave people to, like, I think of it as like, you know, there's a hostel, there's a hospital, and there's a hospice. So I think people in Latin America still have like the medieval mentality where that's where you drop off vagrants and people that you don't want to deal with, and the church handles them. Have you come across that?
No. Again, I think she probably hasn't heard what's going on, and I wonder if she has heard what's going on in Latin America, because I don't think they see that. She may be saying that from her understanding, but I don't, like the woman, I could give you the link so you can listen to the podcast. She didn't have any problems with that word. And she's in Argentina. So I don't think so. I have, maybe for her, it rang strange, but I don't see that being a problem. I think they need more advocacy as to what a spiritual care worker does at the time of dying. I think they just need more help understanding that, because there's just not much. They have psychologists, but they don't have spiritual care workers. That's just something that's a field that's, I think, in my mindset, is wide open. And I don't think that word would be an issue, in my opinion. You know, I'm not sure why. Maybe I'm not sure why she would think that. Yeah.
Well, we want to thank you for your time. It's been very informative conversation, and I just think that we need to allow more voices and more different approaches to be available. So then we have that diversity that people talk about. It's like diversity was like a thing like 10 years ago where they needed to bring in diversity, and then it kind of faded away. And again, if you don't address the issues, then they come up in non-constructive ways. So we're trying to lift up the field that we're part of and give it more, let's like fill in the gaps. Like if there are cultural things, even linguistic and societal things that are not being taken into account, we want to be able to speak up and be an advocate for the people that might not have part of the pie or don't have access to those resources. So I like your approach of contacting like-minded people who are already in the institution, and then building bridges with their help so then there's better opportunities for people in the future.
Yeah, and peacefully. I mean, I agree with you. There's no need for us to go and, like flip chairs and, we need to do the work peacefully, right? But I agree. So thank you for inviting me. I really enjoyed this discussion. I hope to hear, so send me the link and I may post it somewhere, maybe in my own Facebook page, or who knows.
Definitely.
If you don't want me to, that's fine.
I wanted to go out. I want more people to listen to the show, so thank you for your time.